We're up to the 8th principle of the faith, the 8th description of reality, and it is that the 5 books of Moshe that he wrote are all divine words. They're all dictated by God. They're God's words, not Moshe's words. We've just discovered in the previous principle that Moshe had the clearest vision, the clearest insights into the reality of God. This is the preservation of that. The body of knowledge that Moshe had was immense, and he gave it over and taught the entire generation. 40 years they were in the wilderness. He was teaching them about his insights and his revelations and so on. But when God told him write down the Torah, God is saying use these words to create an anchor of the insights that you have. And this is the first time that a revelation has been published, because that's the clarity of Moshe's insights into God, that he saw exactly what was going on, or as exact as a human can. So God said, okay, take that exact or nearly exact insight into the reality of myself and record it this way. And that'll be the anchor to all the entire body of revelation that I've given you over your lifetime and that you've tried to teach the Jewish people. Along with this came methods of preserving that writing to make sure that it never became corrupt, because ancient texts do become corrupt when you copy them over. God's not going to change the nature of the world, so people make mistakes. So one way to correct that, to make sure that the text doesn't become corrupted, is that there's an instruction in the Torah that everyone has to write, every male has to write his own copy of the Torah, so that there's a lot of copies, so that it doesn't get lost. Also, there's another instruction, more prevalent, is that everyone has to know the Torah. They have to study it, they have to know it inside out, they have to know all the details as best they can, etc. So there's a tremendous drive to scholarship, and they didn't have TV, they didn't have as many distractions as we have. So and especially in the 40 years of the wilderness, what they did all day was they studied the Torah, and this continued through the generations until they were exiled and dispersed, and that's why they started producing more literature, more written books. But the 5 books of Moshe were the first time that the revelation was published, written down in word form, and it provides the anchor of all the insights that Moshe had, the clarity that he had into the reality of God. And the instructions to write it and to study it are the 2 ways that God gave over to make sure that you're doing the best you can to preserve it. Now, along with that, there's a promise to God that this will never be forgotten from your generations. So I take that to mean that God is going to monitor our transmission of the Torah and make sure that, if someone makes a mistake, because they're human and they're allowed to make mistakes, and that God does not want to make them unhuman, but he can provide instances where the mistake will be found out and discovered and corrected. And so he has an ongoing surveillance or monitoring of this situation. On top of that, the rabbis got involved. Moshe, being the first rabbi, first teacher, rabbi means teacher, Moshe instituted the idea that the Torah be read publicly every Shabbos, every Sabbath. And so when you read the Torah publicly, so first of all, everybody's learning it, and secondly, you hear what's being read, you can check against what you know or another copy and make sure that they're consistent one with the other. And to this day, we read the Torah publicly, and people are following along in other texts, and sometimes it happens that you find out that there's a letter missing, or word missing, or something's wrong, plus the reader himself is being very careful to notice if there's any error in the text. Even if 2 letters run together, that's considered an error, and it has to be corrected as soon as the Sabbath is over. Otherwise, you have to put the Torah in storage. So no errors are allowed in the written text. And Ezra, many hundreds of years later, after Moshe, he instituted that they read the Torah publicly Mondays and Thursday mornings, and also Shabbos afternoon. So 3 days don't go by without a public reading. And through all these efforts at public reading and studying and so on. So this was we were doing the best we could to preserve the accuracy of the written text. And that's our anchor to all the insights that Moshe received into the reality of God and transmitted to the Jewish people in the form of instructions and history and lessons and so on. There were other prophets. Moshe is the one that told us there were other prophets that received communication from God, such as Adam, such as Noah, such as Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and others. Bilam, the wicked person who tried to curse us, but he was also a prophet of God. All this we know from Moshe, but none of them before Moshe had ever published anything. They were never given the mandate to do so. So Moshe is the first one to give the mandate, and then subsequent prophets were given a mandate to write, but they weren't told which words to use. The words weren't dictated, because their clarity of the vision wasn't as clear as Moshe. So you couldn't say it was dictated. It was that they made up the words to record what they saw. But it was their version, not God's version. Whereas here with Moshe, it's God's version of what Moshe received, because the words were dictated, so to speak. So that makes a big difference. And that establishes the authority of the 5 books of Moshe, the Torah, which now has 24 books in it because of subsequent prophecies and writings and so on. But the 5 books of Moshe, that's what we're talking about. They're dictated by God. Every word is holy, God's word, and we preserve it as such. And that's the end of the 8th principle.